Hi, I'm Roberta Glass, and you're listening to my channel. Today, we're going to talk to Carol, a former The Way International cult member, and we're going to find out what the Way International can teach us about NXIVM. Stay tuned. Today's guest, Carol, spent 2 years in the Way International cult. The Way was officially founded by former United Church of Christ minister Victor Paul Wierwille in New Knoxville, Ohio in 1955. By the mid-'80s, The Way was one of America's largest cults, with 100,000 members, and was regarded by many as one of America's most dangerous cults. Unfortunately, Wierwille did not receive the healing in Christ that he preached, and he died in 1985 and passed the ministry on to the Vice President Craig Martindale. By the 2000s, Craig Martindale had to step down when the Way followers accused him of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and even gang rape. Carol has been watching the NXIVM story closely, and we are going to explore the Way International, its beliefs, and what it can teach us about NXIVM. Welcome, Carol. Welcome, Carol. How did you get involved in the Way?
I was manager of a fast food restaurant. I needed to hire a window washer. Some guy had cold called, and I called him back, and he was the one who witnessed to me.
Okay. And is there a typical Way member? Or was there? This was like 1980, 82, you said?
It was probably November, December of '82 when I first met him, and then the spiel just kind of casually happened then, and then I went to the first PFAL class in January of '83.
So PFL is Power for Abundant Living, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so was there a typical Way member, or who was attracted to the Way?
From the other people who were in the various twigs when we got together, mostly it was disenfranchised Catholics. Because I never met any Methodists or Presbyterians, etc. I met a lot of ex-Catholics who were angry with the church for various reasons. They were generally people from middle class, not upper middle class. There were some doctors and lawyers, but not that many. Mostly it was just middle-of-the-road people.
Mm-hmm. And what is a twig? What is a trunk? How is the tree? How does a tree represent the structure of the Way?
Okay, this is how Victor Paul Wierwille set it up. First of all, there's no church. There are fellowships in the home. Each individual member of a home fellowship is called a leaf. That's what I was.
Mm-hmm.
A combination of the leaves made a twig. That's why we called it, when we went to fellowship, we're having twig tonight. Usually someone who had come off the WOW field, which is word over the world ambassador, that somebody went out for a year to get other people to take Power for Abundant Living. Usually that person with another one, usually it was a male and a female, would be the leaders of the twig. And then the combination of twigs made a branch.
Mm-hmm.
Then that made, for the state, that was called a limb. So New York State was a limb state. And then all of the limbs in one country, because this was in South America, Puerto Rico, England, Ireland. I don't think I met anybody from Scotland. but all those limbs in one country made the trunk. And then the root was referred in two ways. The root was where the headquarters was, which was the old family farm in New Knoxville, Ohio. But basically the root was VP Wierwille, because that's where everything, all the teachings, all the revelations came from.
Okay. And who was Victor Paul Wierwille? I explained a little bit about him in the opening, but he was a former minister, and he was kind of had this folksy appeal, I would say. But what do you think his how would you sum him up, and what do you think his appeal was?
He was an extremely charming, engaging man. I did meet him once, not on a personal level, but I saw him, he was at a gazebo in one of the Rock of Ages giving a short speech or Bible teaching to a group of us. And I got to shake his hand and see him up front. He was extremely charming. He was like your grandfather.
Yeah.
Very personable, very hands-on. You actually believe he loved to meet everybody, from the youngest to the oldest. He really, and anybody would like him.
Yeah, and I had the same reaction to him. It was very like a 1950s father or grandfather, but kind of with a little bit of like a real man's man type macho bent to him. You know, they had, I saw a thing, I think it was like a German documentary where he was chopping wood and coming in, and he was called the doctor, and another name for him was Father of the Word. Is that right?
Not just Father of the Word. He was called Man of God for our time.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, he was referred to as our Father in the Word. But he was the man who was now going to reestablish the church the way it had originally been during the time that the book of Acts was written.
Right.
So he was bringing it back to the original apostolic way, according to what he said God told him.
Right. And the way is very focused on the word, but it's the word as his interpretation of it. Is right? Is that a good summation of?
Yes, because God told him that if he taught the word exactly the way that it had been taught in the time of the apostles, God would bless him. And so that's what he claimed to do. And so he received special revelation on how to preach the original word of God.
But some of his teachings would be categorized as more like conspiracy theories. Like he preached that the Holocaust was invented by the Jews. Also, that the Illuminati exists and wants to take over the U.S. Was that higher up kind of way teachings, or were you indoctrinated with that?
I think because I was just a little leaf in a twig, and I was not in it long enough, and I did not go well, and I did not go Waycore. I never saw or heard that. Wow. I do know that sometime during the end of my second year, I was at a local twig leader's house having lunch, and she was the one who brought up the fact that the Holocaust had never happened, and that it was a lie perpetrated by the devil because Dr. Wierwille was German. And, of course, the devil didn't want this minister to prosper and have his revelation taught throughout the world. Outside of that, I didn't hear it, but I think because I wasn't high enough up.
I mean, because when I read that, I was like, wow, he could have had his own YouTube conspiracy channel, because that seems to be quite trendy. The other thing, but the other kind of trap in it is that, so if you're if you're not understanding, if you're not using the Bible or understanding the Bible, but it's all his interpretation of it. So he also preached this kind of prosperity gospel. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes. We were taught in the way that believing equals receiving.
Mm-hmm.
So if I believe for a parking spot, and if I believe rightly enough, and I'm not just tithing, I'm abundantly sharing, I'm going to get that parking spot. But if I don't get that parking spot, I either didn't believe rightly, or my twig leader would say to me, well, did you not just only tithe, but did you abundantly share, which means more than the 10%? In fact, we had a day called, on March 15th, called Uncle Harry Day, where we were supposed to do like Uncle Harry did, which was whatever excess assets we didn't need, we would donate to the way. So yes, they did teach that prosperity to the Dr. Norman Vincent Peale's book on positive thinking was stress. We were always supposed to be up, and if we weren't believing in that up fashion and not stepping on the hose, that's what they likened it to. That's God's water coming through the hose, and if you don't believe rightly and abundantly share, you're not going to get that parking spot.
And it's a lot like things that are very popular now, like The Secret, where you kind of you create your own reality. So your thinking makes it happen. And that kind of thing is really rooted in the occult, which you wouldn't think would be coupled with a Bible cult. It's a very odd connection, no?
When you word it that way, yes, I do get it. But see, we were supposed to stay away from negative things.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember the book Fahrenheit 451,
yes,
there were actually things that we were not supposed to read or listen to. And one of them, which is very odd, was country music, because country music was generally about my dog died, my wife divorced me, things like that.
Right.
I could not have country music on, or I would be lectured about it, because that's not positive.
And also any books that were written by former members of the Way that left, even if it was not critical of the Way, those books were burned. Did you see any book burning? Or
I didn't see any book burning, but I do know that there was a member of the Way who created some religious music that we were all encouraged to buy at the first Rock of Ages that I went to.
What was the Rock of Ages? I'm sorry to interrupt. What is the Rock of Ages?
Oh, the Rock of Ages was a big gathering once a year during the second week of August at the headquarters, which was the old family farm in New Knoxville, Ohio. Uh-huh. And we went there. It was from Sunday night till Friday evening, and there were all kinds of Bible teachings, getting together with people from all around the world. At that time that I went, there were 15,000 people. It was a lot of fun, but also, too, it was the starting off point for people who were going, wow, word over the world, ambassador. And it also, too, you were very much encouraged, if you had not decided during that year, you were encouraged during the Rock of Ages to sign up to go wow. And Friday evening, you would be leaving to go out with 3 other people, whoever they were. So there were always 4 people to wherever they sent you. And some of it could be Puerto Rico, over to England, over to Ireland, down to Mexico. Most of it was in the United States. But that's what the Rock of Ages was for. I actually liked it. It was fun.
Yeah, there's a documentary on YouTube if anyone's interested on the... it's called Rock of Ages. And the way... Really, oh, I'm sorry. I interrupted you. How did the Way use performance? Was it just to get new people?
Okay, they always encouraged all the believers to create dance, to create music. It was very much, if you've ever been to any of the Pentecostal churches, it was a lot like that. There was a lot of religious entertaining, but it had to be in line with what Dr. Wierwille was teaching us.
Uh-huh. And how were women treated in the way?
Okay. We were taught, one, that women are for men and man is for God. So the women didn't have leadership positions because the women were for the men. Mm-hmm. And man himself is for God. And they were the ones who would hold the positions of leadership. They're the ones who became ministers. Even though when they sent out a married couple, the wife would always be the partner of the husband in whatever ministry he had, but she really didn't have any power except what he had.
Okay, and this cult has so many allegations of sexual abuse, and what was the way teaching on sex, and how was the reality different?
Okay, when Dr. Wierwille had appointed his predecessor, L. Craig Martindale, things changed rather rapidly. So when Craig took over, we were told, and I can remember this at one of the WOW meetings we had in the city that I live in. I wasn't going WOW, but the local twigs would come and help to facilitate the big meeting. There was a taped speech that Craig Martindale gave, and in it, we were told there were only two things you couldn't do: drugs and homosexuality. Everything else was on the table, and Wow. They were evidently doing everything else. Adultery was just thought as part and parcel, and once you were born again and spoke in a tongue, because now you had the Holy Spirit in you, it didn't matter what you did. You could do anything, and especially when it came to sex, you were given license. And I did kind of see some of that, but I was never told about it. I was never confronted with it. But I did question one of my twig leaders about her and her husband spending time with other people of the opposite sex and how they behaved. And evidently it was quite rampant.
Wow. And was sex used to recruit people?
Oh yeah. During the second year, when I was living with a bunch of other believer women, I was at a twig at one of the WOW houses, and I personally was going to the. They tried to maneuver me to get a recruit that they wanted to take power for abundant living by having me be extra nice to him, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So, yeah, sex was used, just like flirty fishing was for the children of God. That was the first time I openly saw that. I just kind of suspected the rest. And I was really kind of shocked that they were so open about it at that point.
And you had mentioned that before when we talked that that the cult members knew the word love bombing and used it when they were planned to do it. Is that can you explain that or tell that story?
Yes. I remember I was at a meeting at one of the twig leaders. This was a different one because it wasn't my twig, but we would go around to various other twigs at times. And I was at a meeting at their house, and I can remember someone who was a Wake Corps grad and in fact was marrying a guy from Greece so they could go over to Greece and now do word over the world there. I can remember her very vividly using the term love bombing. And that was the first time that I heard it. And I hear her saying, well, let's just love bomb this person until we get him to take PFAL.
Wow.
So they knew what they were doing. This would have been about a year and a half of my being part of this group. Up until that point, I was ignorant of not only the term, but of the use of anything. I just thought they liked me.
Right. Yeah, and that just amazed me when you told me that, because I always thought it was like part of the culture of the cult and that they weren't aware that they were doing it. Just they learned through other people doing it to them. But that was really interesting and something I didn't usually hear. What made you leave?
Well, there was a number of things. There was a huge disconnect between what they taught and what people did. And during that second year, I was living in a house full of other believer women. There were a total of 5 of us, me and 4 others. And we occupied the whole house. There was a flat on one and a flat on the next. But we were a twig. And my housemate wasn't faithful when it came to finances.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a few other things that happened. When you're on the WOW field, you're not supposed to engage in dating or sexual activity. And one of the members who lived upstairs, I brought that to the attention of my area leader, that there was something going on there, and that my housemate herself wasn't paying her half of the rent, etc. There was a huge disconnect. They told me, the pat answer that was given to me always was, people will always disappoint you. And I walked away kind of confused mentally, like, and don't look to people, look to the Word. And I'm thinking, okay, what am I doing wrong here?
Yeah, because it always goes back to you. You're always at fault, even when your roommate won't pay the rent.
Yeah, and the fact that one of the believer women was, I can't say the word, but she was being intimate with a guy on the WOW field, and that's not supposed to be happening. He's supposed to be spending 24/7 getting people to sign up for Power for Abundant Living. I'm the kind of person who thinks, because they would use this phrase too, mean what you say and say what you mean. But then I'm told people will always disappoint you, so which is it?
Right. I mean, that's what I was kind of amazed about when I was researching this cult, is how everything that it says it's about is different than the reality. And that must just be like it must feel like just, it's the ultimate gaslighting feeling.
But I didn't know that term then.
Mm-hmm.
I know it now. I didn't know that term, and they did a really good job on me. I was young. I was naive. I actually believed when he says the Word of God is the will of God, and this is what it says, and they were saying to me, this is what we stand for, and yet they were doing quite the opposite. It was you can fill in the other word, it was a real mind.
Right, yeah, right. And how did you heal from it?
Well, even though this was decades ago, one never completely heals. The one saving grace that I had was I never burned all my bridges. I saw people in this group, and this happens in a lot of groups, had burned the bridge to their family, to their friends, have left careers, good jobs, given all their possessions, because you're told, don't just tithe, abundantly share, and do like Uncle Harry does.
Right.
I didn't leave my job. My job was a challenging one. I had some pretty hard times. As I told you, poverty is a harsh mistress.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not put myself back in that position again. even though they would constantly use the term, oh, you're too comfortable. You need to get out of your comfort zone. You need to go, wow. So that was a saving grace for me, although for the next year, and no one ever contacted me again, for the next year, I would often cry on a daily basis. It has been a long process. You learn to get on with life, not get over it. Time and distance help, but there are long-term effects for anyone who's been in a cult of any kind.
What are the long-term effects?
Well, I don't trust people.
Okay.
I have a great deal of difficulty with authority. Those two things I didn't have before. Also, they impressed upon me that I wasn't good enough and I wasn't lovable enough. And those things have stayed with me. It's very hard for me to believe if somebody says, I like you, or you did a good job, anything like that. When they play with your mind like that, it doesn't ever totally leave you. I think, like Dr. Margaret Singer said, the biggest thing that she found out when she had clients who had come out of a cult is that we no longer trust.
That's really you really need that in life, some sort of kind of, trust of people. That's really sad. It's a terrible thing to take from someone too. And how do you think that, what do you think that people don't understand about cults?
I think the majority of people are very naive, that they have not been schooled well enough or educated enough. If they would look at the way TOWs are indoctrinated,
mm-hmm.
and they only think that it works that way. It can be extremely subtle. They just have not done their homework. They're not taught about that the techniques, whether it's a religion, it could be a political ideology, it can be anything. It can be one of these self-help groups.
Mm-hmm.
They use the same techniques, separating you from your family and friends, changing what you do on a daily basis, who you fraternize with, changing your diet.
Right.
And then always keeping you busy. But it's done so subtly that you don't realize it unless you step back, step outside it, or somebody else takes you aside and tells you this is what's happening.
Do you think there's anything you can say to someone who's in a cult to get them out? Like I see these Jehovah's Witnesses every day in the subway. I feel so sorry for them. Is there anything you can say to them to start their critical thinking? Or
well, the thing that used to work, and now you can't do it, unfortunately, was parents of their adult children who had got involved in these cults would get a deprogrammer, somebody like Ted Patrick, who unfortunately finally, people like the Unification Church, etc., got him in prison.
mm-hmm.
The way that they deprogrammed people back in the 70s and 80s was they would actually go and physically remove them from the cult, take them to a safe place, where now they would get adequate sleep, where they wouldn't be kept busy 24/7, where they would now get adequate nutrition, and then they would just give them the facts. They would tell them where these teachings were wrong. They would actually bring out the Bible, show them this is what it actually says, not what you're being taught. And over a 3 or 4 day period, many people, and I happen to know one, who went from the Moonies to the Way Ministry, and it did work the first time, where they had him physically removed from the Moonies, paid $10,000 to a deprogrammer. He was deprogrammed within 3 days, But then about a year or so later, he found another cult, the way to get into.
Yeah,
that's the only way that works. But you have to get them. In my opinion, this is my opinion now. You have to get them early on.
And so, how do you think the way is similar or dissimilar to NXIVM?
Oh, first of all, you have the man at the top. Always seems to be a man at the top.
Yeah. Why never so rarely a woman, right?
I don't think I've come across one, and I've probably done a little more homework than most people have. But the man at the top who has all the answers, he is getting revelation, whether it's from God or whether it's from his 240-point IQ that he told us he had. So there's something special about that person, and they're going to lead you to the promised land. Can you repeat the question? I just lost my
how is it like? How is NXIVM dissimilar or similar to the way? And you said the man at the top, who's perfect, and certainly the doctor or Wierwille was perfect man who had was given divine revelation.
Yeah, you notice how because I've been following this NXIVM thing.
Mm-hmm.
In the way they use the symbolism of the locked box, which means what happens here stays here. And if you notice, Keith did the same thing by each woman, I should say, that he was involved with. You can't tell the other woman. So they also use secrecy a lot.
Uh-huh.
That's another thing. They have secrecy. If you notice how both of these groups separate people, they try to separate couples. They also, if you notice, both in the way, we were all encouraged to go work at headquarters. They wanted me to be a programmer there. Your dependency is increasingly on the group. It was increasingly on the way with people that I knew in it, and I've noticed from what that's been in the news and the research I've done on NXIVM, these prime people that we know, not the Bronfmans, because they have their own money, they became increasingly dependent upon NXIVM for whatever money or assets they had. Everything became dependent upon whatever Keith will dole out to you, just like in the way.
Huh. And what is your take on Claire Bronfman? Nancy Salzman or Allison Mack? I mean, why do you think Allison Mack is staying loyal to the cult?
This is my opinion, because with the advent of the internet, I'm able to follow some of the people that I knew in the way ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Those who had burned their bridges and were in it long term are still in it. This is 30-some years later. They may not be officially with the way in New Knoxville, but they started offshoots, and they're still loyal to the teachings of what Dr. Wierwille taught. Half of it's truth, another half of it is plagiarism, and then he made up stuff, too.
Yeah, he was a big plagiarizer.
So, yeah. My opinion is that Allison Mack has been in it too long. And the fact that that group has literally taken everything from her. They've taken her career, they've taken her reputation, they've taken her chance to have a family, to have a husband, or, I don't know, a wife, have children. Everything's been taken from her. And my impression of watching the videos, and yes, I have watched the videos, she's enthralled with this guy. She's entranced. Her mind has really been worked on. I don't think she will ever recover. As I said, from my own experience, I know that there are long-term effects. Mine was only a couple of years, and I didn't give up everything. She's given up everything.
Yeah.
I see very little.
Very little hope for her. You have. Is that what?
Yeah. I don't think that she will ever recover, and I think she's going to be loyal to the very end to him and NXIVM. Nancy Salzman, I'm ashamed that she's a registered nurse. I kind of think from the research that I've done about her, because she had her own, even though she's not a licensed therapist, she was giving therapy to people prior to meeting Keith. I think she may have started out thinking this was a good thing, and I think it got out of control, and she was held there by the money. She was making some pretty good money for a while. It's purported she was making a couple of $100,000 a year up until she fell out of grace with him for some reason.
Yeah, Claire Bronfman took her spot. They found $500,000 in her home in shoeboxes. So
I think that was her runaway money, because she told people that she had money stashed. Claire Bronfman, this is what I've said to others. I've said, all that money, and she doesn't even have a GED. She could have bought one. Okay, she could have had one forged. I think this was her way. Claire Bronfman was not parented well. I don't think her sister was either, but it especially, I think affected Claire. And I think she's morphed into something that can never be recovered. I don't see her as a nice person. I think she really is as bad as we suspect she is, and probably worse. All of that money doesn't help, because she has never had to pay for any of her sins. She might not still. Who knows? I would be very afraid of her. I would be afraid to be in her presence. I would be afraid to be on the wrong side of her. I hope I never meet her. I think those three right there, Nancy, Claire, and Allison, can never be recovered and really should not be in polite society.
Yeah, and, how do you feel about the defense for Allison or Nancy Salzman, especially Allison Mack, that she was brainwashed or a victim of undue influence as a defense? That so often fails in court. Do you think that should be considered in her case?
If I were a juror on that case, one, they couldn't use the excuse that she's a victim. I would say she's a child of her time and a result of the sexual revolution. So it's kind of anything goes, and the current term that's used is, well, that's your kink. I think that the defense will try to use that. So I do not see her, maybe 10% I see her as a victim. The other 90%, she victimized others. She allowed whatever boundaries she might have had, and I don't think she was raised with many boundaries. Mm-hmm. Whatever boundaries she might have had, she totally let NXIVM and Keith and probably a few others transgress. She doesn't have any boundaries anymore. It's whatever Keith wants. And unfortunately, he destroys people's lives.
And the fact that her parents were involved, her father gave music lessons to NXIVM members and took classes. That to me seems like they should be the ones talking sense to her parents, and they seem to be on Keith's side. So, I mean, that makes it just seem even more hopeless to me. I just don't see how she's going to get out of it. But what is your feeling about the way that NXIVM was portrayed in the media? Were you surprised that Alex Jones and Joe Rogan said that this may not have been a cult, and this may have just been some like kinky club, and that women like to be abused?
Knowing men like I do, I think that they were just trying to be funny. I really do. I think this is how guys talk. I don't think they really meant it. It was certainly good for publicity. It made people, listen up. I don't really think he was serious. I just think he said it just to stir up trouble, to have people talk about it. I really don't think that those guys think that way. It just made good talk.
Okay. I think I'm coming to the end of my questions. This has been really fascinating. I love talking to you about this stuff, and thank you so much for sharing your story and your thoughts, and I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thanks.